You are watching the press preview now, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Rachel Shabi and editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Vladimir Putin's warning to the West: your sanctions are akin to an act of war. That's on the front of The Observer. Meanwhile, The Telegraph looks at Defence Secretary Ben Wallis's threat to Mr Putin that to test the UK would result in some form of a response. The Mirror leads with Russian soldiers breaking a ceasefire in Mariupol with the headline, "Clear off, back to Russia." Merciless Putin shells evacuees, reads the front of the Sunday Times, as they too lead with the situation in Mariupol. The Express quotes Foreign Secretary Liz Truss that the war in Ukraine represents the struggle of our generation. The Star claims that the Russian leader is dying of cancer. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Rachel Shabi and Wallis Simons. Welcome to you both. Good evening. Let's start with the Times front page and their headline there, "Merciless Putin shells evacuees." And this is the ceasefire that essentially wasn't, Rachel.
That's right. So there was supposed to be a ceasefire in Mariupol, which is a southern port city in Ukraine. And just as it was taking effect, Russian strikes began, so it was instantly broken. So anyone who was trying to leave the city, which has already been besieged, could not do so. It's absolutely heartbreaking to watch things like this take place, but also has to be said, no surprise for anyone who watched Russians' actions in Syria a few years ago. But obviously, if there is a ceasefire, bad enough that it's broken, but if there is a ceasefire, then it kind of implies if there is an allowance for to evacuate people who can and wish to leave, and also to replenish supplies, because food and medical supplies are very, very low in that city. It doesn't bode well. It suggests that there is tragically far worse to come in that area.
You're breaking up a little bit there, Rachel, but let's bring Jake in now. And looking at that picture on the front page of the Times with those, looks like hundreds of people sheltering under a bridge, this breaking of the ceasefire just reiterates the fact that there are no rules. There are no rules by which President Putin is working.
That's right. I mean, what we're really seeing is a very old-fashioned kind of war, a return to the total war that we haven't seen in Europe since 1945, in which civilians are seen as legitimate targets before the Geneva Convention, and Russia will just do whatever it takes to win this war. And Rachel rightly pointed out the Syrian war, when Russia used similarly brutal carpet bombing tactics on cities like Aleppo. And now we're seeing those tactics once again being rolled out in Ukraine because the Russian war machine is clearly not up to the job of doing proper, a proper siege and street by street urban warfare. Instead, it's seeking to stand back and just bomb these cities into oblivion. And as one commentator said recently, creating a desert and calling it peace. And so, these are obviously very, very dangerous and hugely worrying times that are taking us back decades upon decades to an era that we all thought that we had seen the last of. And sadly, it's rearing its ugly head once again in the era of Vladimir Putin.
And for the moment, we're seeing that NATO is not agreeing to a no-fly zone, but various countries are ramping up the sanctions against Russia and increasingly worrying that President Putin is now saying that the sanctions imposed against his regime, he's seeing that as a declaration of war, Rachel.
Yeah, the rhetoric over the last few days from Putin and from others, it has to be said, has been absolutely appalling and horrifying and quite terrifying. Just this constant ratcheting up that's going on. These sanctions are unprecedented. I mean, we've never seen countries that wouldn't usually partake in sanctions against Russia, Japan, Singapore, they have done so this time. And so it's no surprise that Putin is lashing out. They will have a chokehold on the Russian economy. They will start to take effect. But yes, you're right that the language that he is using recently and just in the last few weeks has been absolutely horrifying.
And the Observer also picking up on that line, and it is chilling that this warning has been delivered to the West. One wonders what his response to the West might be. If he's saying that this is an act of war, what will he do next, Jake?
Yes, I mean, Putin has long adhered to the Lenin idea of, or the metaphor of having a bayonet and sticking it into the other side. If you feel steel, withdraw, and if you feel softness or mush, keep pushing. And he's been keeping testing us, year on year via his actions in Crimea some years ago, in Georgia. And now he's felt that he, can take action in Ukraine. He's seeing where the line is that we're going to respond. And the extension of that is this rhetoric, citing the nuclear threat, saying that us supporting Ukraine via weapons and trying to put pressure on Russia via sanctions is akin to an act of war. He's trying to put more and more pressure on NATO and on the West. But I think that it's a grave mistake to look at our response to Russian aggression, i.e. sanctions, and to look at our defensive position, i.e. NATO and the building up of forces there, as being the cause of any kind of aggression or any kind of warfare or conflict. The blame for this lies squarely with Vladimir Putin. NATO didn't invade any other country. This is purely his fault. Russia has invaded Ukraine. We mustn't mistake NATO's defensive actions and the West's defensive actions against Russia as any kind of act of aggression. They are purely, defensive, and we've been pushed to it by Russia's aggression.
Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallis, in the Sunday Telegraph is quoted as saying, "Don't test us." That's his warning to Vladimir Putin, not a military response, he's suggesting, but that they can give the Ukrainians much more by way of weapons. Rachel.
Well, that's right. You have to wonder about the wisdom of this, though. I mean, this is just more escalation, isn't it? The Defence Secretary saying, you shouldn't test us and you've seriously underestimated the country's resolve. Well, fine, but the UK and other countries have made it clear that there will be no military operation from any other country in Ukraine. There won't be a no-fly zone, because that is an escalation that no one is willing to countenance. Devastating as it is to watch Ukraine go through a horrifying assault, just being bombarded relentlessly in the most appalling way by Russian forces. It is simply the case that there isn't going to be an international military response. And that being the reality, we need to be talking about negotiation. Escalation of rhetoric is really not going to get us anywhere.
Jake, do you agree with Rachel that this bellicose approach and this tone from Ben Wallis is not what's needed at this precise time?
I don't agree, no. I think that what we need to show to Vladimir Putin is that he cannot intimidate us. He cannot intimidate the West as a whole, and he cannot throw his weight around with impunity by raising the spectre of nuclear war. I mean, he's not the only country in the world with nuclear weapons. NATO, as a conjoined force, has overwhelmingly greater ability to destroy Russia than vice versa, so long as we act with united resolve. Now, I'm not calling for war, don't get me wrong, but what I'm saying is that Putin's modus operandi, as he's proved year in, year out, is to test the opposition, and wherever he finds weakness, he then exploits that. And history has taught us that when dealing with tyrants and despots and dictators who have designs on other countries, on invading them and occupying them and so forth, the only thing that stops them is a determined, resolute show of strength. And that's what we must show as a united front to Vladimir Putin right now, so that he isn't tempted to push this any further.
We're going to leave it there. We're going to leave it there just before the break. Rachel, we will be back. But coming up, we'll take a look at the Sunday People. Their headline: "You can stick your oil, Vlad." Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, journalist and author Rachel Shabi, and editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallis Simons. There they both are. Welcome back to you both. Let's have a look at the Sunday Express, and Liz Truss pictured there, saying that this is the struggle of our generation, and it is actually a struggle to protect Western values. Jake.
Yes, quite a powerful phrase there, the struggle of our generation. I think that it is quite apt. You know, for all of my lifetime and that of many other people, we've got used to this post-war settlement by which we've been living in peace with relative security. All of the wars that we have waged have taken place many thousands of miles from our shores with no direct repercussions on us, leaving us free to become preoccupied with issues of identity and race and colonialism and all the other things that we've had the indulgence to talk about, I guess. And yet suddenly, while we busy ourselves thinking about those things, 1945 has come by again, not too many miles away from our homes. And this has taken us all by surprise, I think. There's a sort of cultural shock that's gone through the West as a whole, suddenly realizing that that reality could be rather more serious than we've all gotten used to over the last decades. And I guess the real question now is, are we up to it? Are we up to facing up to this very real and very horrendous struggle and challenge that's coming from the East? And do we have the resolve and the grit to really do what it takes to face down Putin and stand up for our values? And I guess that's what Liz Truss was pointing to with this phrase, the struggle of our generation. Do we have what it takes to meet that challenge?
But Rachel, as we've seen thus far, it doesn't look as though there will be any military confrontation. So to President Putin, this might seem very weak. He's just facing more and more sanctions.
I mean, I don't think the sanctions are weak by any means. I think they're pretty punitive and are likely to take effect. But to speak to this sort of defining moment analysis of Liz Truss, I mean, I think that I would say in response to that everything is connected. So, you know, we've been fighting wars that haven't impacted us really. Well, you know, the invasion of Iraq followed out that region, created, you know, the conditions for Islamic State, created the conditions for Russia to invade Syria and hone its barbaric military skill, for want of a better word, there. Our dependency on oil and energy and our reluctance to shift to renewables has meant that, you know, we are funding Putin right now because of our energy dependency there. We've got 30 years of neoliberalism that has created what's known as a London laundromat for Russian oligarch money, again, propping up Putin. If this is a defining moment, then maybe we can realize that our consequences, and we have helped create this monster that is Putin. That is in no way saying that we are responsible for his invasion of Ukraine and the appalling acts that we've seen in the last week. But things are interconnected. So, you know, maybe we can start to de-link them now.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit there, Rachel, but I think your point came across. And there's much support for Ukraine and people wanting to demonstrate that support here. The Sunday People picking up on the story of the British dockers refusing to unload Russian oil from a tanker, and that's in a show of solidarity with Ukraine. The headline: "You can stick your oil, Vlad." Jake.
That's right. I mean, this is quite a powerful story because it brings together the idea that not just governments in the West are opposed against Putin, also ordinary people as well. I mean, I think that, as far back as I can remember, this is the most unifying cause that I've seen in our country. Everybody is flying Ukraine, or many people are flying Ukrainian flags. There are very, very few voices sticking up for Putin and putting Russia's point of view, or the official Russian authorities' point of view. The cause of Ukraine has unified this country behind them, has unified the West and unified, Europe. And here we can see that Docker's refusing to offload Russian oil is mirroring the widespread sanctions that are being meted out against the Putin regime, and also all the different commercial companies from Apple to Burberry who are pulling out of Russia as well, all with one goal: to try to make Vladimir Putin feel the pain and the consequences of his actions without causing us to have to go into action. And that's the vital thing. And the fact that everybody is united from dockers to politicians and back again shows that the West really does speak with one voice at the moment, and we need to really build upon that to pile the pressure on Putin to make him pull back.
And Rachel, very quickly, just picking up on that theme of businesses also pulling out. Burberry, we've had Visa tonight. That feeding into your thought that the sanctions and the efforts to isolate Russia will have an effect.
Well, it remains to be seen. We don't know whether they'll have an effect because we've never seen anything on this scale before. But I guess that the main thing here is removing...
Sorry, Rachel.
I would just say removing his support base amongst the oligarchs, and also removing his capacity, this awful war.